Just 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Good morning, it's 9:30 on Wednesday, 25th of October. This is Britain's Newsroom with myself, Martin Dawley, and the glorious Bev Turner.
Good morning. Both back from holiday. Anything could happen. So, all aboard. Labour attack the Conservatives, suspending more than £800 per person per night on the Bibby Stockholm barge. Surely there must be a cheaper alternative to house migrants.
And a war of words in the Middle East. Israel has called for the UN Secretary-General to resign after he said Palestinians have been subjected to, quotes, 56 years of suffocating occupation. Now, security editor Mark White has all the latest in Tel Aviv.
Well, those comments by Antonio Guterres have caused real anger here in Israel, with many politicians saying the UN Secretary-General is no longer welcome here.
And closer to home, the clean-up continues in the wake of Storm Babette. People are dealing with the damage, but there's more heavy rain forecast and likely flooding. Get in touch if you've been affected.
Wrong type of rain, apparently. The BBC's Director-General Tim Davie is due to meet Tory MPs this afternoon. It's expected he'll be asked to explain why the national broadcaster doesn't refer to Hamas as terrorists. We'll have all the latest.
And to be clear, I think I made it sound like we've been on holiday together. We've both just come back today.
That's right.
Let's not start that rumour. Let us know your thoughts this morning. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address, as always. First, though, here's Ray Addison with your news.
Thanks, guys. Good morning. It's 9:31, our top stories. Israel intensified airstrikes on Gaza overnight, rejecting calls for a ceasefire. The military says it targeted Hamas infrastructure following one of the deadliest days for Palestinians. There are growing concerns that the conflict could spread across the region. This morning, the leaders of terrorist groups reportedly met to discuss the so-called resistance axis against Israel. Lebanon's Hezbollah leader is said to have held talks with the head of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. The United Nations warns the crisis in Gaza is deepening, with more than a third of hospitals forced to close because of damage or a lack of fuel. Doctors say patients are showing signs of disease caused by overcrowding and poor sanitation. The UN says it may have to halt its operations there because fuel is running out. Israel blocked its delivery to prevent Hamas from seizing supplies. Well, the UN Secretary-General, as we've been hearing, has reiterated calls for a ceasefire to allow the safe delivery of aid. Antonio Guterres says he's concerned about what he called clear violations of humanitarian law. The Palestinian Red Crescent confirmed that 8 trucks crossed the Rafah border yesterday, but the UN says dozens more are still waiting to enter from Egypt. The refugee agency says its Gaza shelters are 4 times over capacity, with nearly 600,000 internally displaced people seeking help. And MPs are expected to vote later over whether Peter Bone should be suspended from the Commons. It's after a parliamentary panel found the member for Wellingborough committed acts of bullying and 1 act of sexual misconduct against a male staff member in 2012 and 2013. If the recommended 6-week suspension is approved, it could trigger a recall petition and lead to a by-election. Mr Bone denies the allegations and has vowed to continue representing his constituents. And parts of the UK devastated by floods are now facing a yellow fog warning. The Met Office says the difficult conditions could lead to disruption. The warning, which runs until 11 a.m, covers the east and northeast of England, the Midlands and northeast Wales. You can find more on all those stories on our website, gbnews.com. Now let's get back to Martin and Bev.
Very good morning. It's 9:34 on Wednesday. Now, Labour has attacked the Tories for spending more than £800 per person per night to house asylum seekers on a barge.
And this comes after almost a year after the Prime Minister promised to end costly asylum hotel use. But this doesn't sound that cheap to me.
Well, if there is a cheaper alternative for the United Kingdom, we're yet to hear it. Well, here to discuss this is columnist at the Daily Mail, Sarah Vine. Sarah, lovely to see you. Most people, I think everybody listening to this, will just feel their blood boiling at the idea that we're spending the equivalent on each person of a suite at the Savoy.
I don't understand how it can cost £800. And what are they spending that on?
Well, there isn't enough transparency on it, would be
because I mean, there must be some reason, because it's an awful lot of money.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is the government, you just had Robert Jenrick on earlier, who I thought was, quite good, saying that, he's made it his mission to stop housing asylum seekers in 4-star hotels. And I think for most people, a 4-star hotel is a treat for them. They think of it as something that they might go, special anniversary, whatever. So the idea that we're putting asylum seekers in 4-star hotels as a sort of normal thing is really annoying for most ordinary taxpayers. So that's been something that the government has been addressing. But then now they're paying £800 a night. What is that cost? We need to know.
We do.
Really.
It's worth pointing out this is Labour's figures, because you can't get an FOI on what it costs, because I've tried.
So that's freedom of information for people who don't know. When you ask for the facts behind the scenes that we're not being given.
Yeah, and they won't tell us, because if we found out the true amount, I think people would be so horrified it'd be curtains for the Conservatives. So I think the Labour Party has done a bit of guesstimation. But I did look on the way in, and £800 a night, I think we've got a picture on screen here. This is the equivalent, there it is, look, that's the King Deluxe suite at the Savoy Hotel on Mayfair. That's what it costs to put somebody on the Bibby Stockholm. I know where I'd rather be. The fact of the matter is, Sarah, surely this points out that it's been a catastrophic waste of money. The Bibby Stockholm is the only boat the government's managed to stop.
Well, I think what's interesting is that I think this whole housing of asylum seekers has been an absolute sort of cash cow for a lot of people. So, for example, do you remember a while ago there was that student accommodation in Huddersfield who chucked out all their students, even though they had paid, their deposits and stuff, because they suddenly got a better offer from the Home Office to house asylum seekers. There's a guy here on page 14 of His Majesty's Daily Mail, I should say these days, who is making, what was it you said?
Well, he made 60 million quid in total, but he made 20 million quid last year alone from caravan parks, which he's kind of kicked out. Well, you're not allowed to book there for a holiday anymore. Instead, asylum seekers are going into his caravans.
Exactly.
He's making a mint.
And we've got a situation where people can't go on holiday because they can't get accommodation. And the whole thing is just... But it's a gravy train. And in fact, the whole asylum seeker thing has become a gravy train, not just in terms of these accommodations, but also in terms of all the lawyers that are involved. I mean, there's just so much money that is being churned through this system.
Do you think, Sarah, that there are politicians who must be somehow making money out of this?
No, they won't be making... Well, I mean, not directly, no. I mean, I can't... They're not allowed to do that.
But indirectly.
But no, I mean, they can't...
There's so much money at stake here that when this amount of taxpayers' money is being swept into private funds, I just can't help but wonder if there's MPs behind the scenes.
What it is, it's complete... It's just inefficiency. And it goes back to the Home Office, which, you know, I think it was David Blunkett who said it was not fit for purpose, and that was a very long time ago. It is not a good department. It runs things very, very inefficiently, and has always done so. And you know, there's no silver bullet to this. There's no one solution. It's about incompetence in the civil service. It's about incompetence in all areas, and it's about money just being thrown at a problem.
Yeah.
And no solution actually emerging.
Yeah. There's another story in the Times today. Apparently the Home Office paid 15 million quid for a former disused prison site. This is the HMP North Eye in Bexhill that was bought last year for 6 million quid. So the government has lost 9 million quid of taxpayers' money in a year. Isn't this down to the fact the Home Office, if they were an ordinary business, they'd all be fired?
Completely. I mean, exactly. It's run so inefficiently, and it's because, of course, for them, taxpayers' money isn't real. It's like when you go to the airport and you buy loads of makeup, which is what I do. It's because I think I'm at the airport, therefore it's not actually real money. It's like eating broken biscuits. They don't think that it's real money because it's taxpayers' money, and therefore you know, they don't have to be accountable. And that is really, really the problem here. And all of these companies ramp their costs up. Anything to do with government. They always get charged through the nose for it.
But why do they take... Is it just that there's nobody accountable? Maybe if you work in the Home Office, the bottom line is you are perhaps predisposed to want to welcome more migrants here. Maybe you feel this is the job of the Home Office to put up people who have had unfortunate experiences elsewhere, and therefore there's a kind of... You feel like that you have a moral right to
you can't help
spend
thinking that
money like this.
I mean, you can't help thinking that if you were a migrant and you were living in Calais and you were thinking, what am I going to do next? Then someone said to you, well, if you go to the UK, they put you in a nice four-star hotel, or in a, you know, that's got to be an incentive for people, and that's why it's so important to stop this, because it will take away another layer of incentive. But the thing about Labour is, of course, you know, they know that if the Tories can somehow fix this problem, that's going to play very well to them at the general election. So it's not in. So of course Labour will be pushing this and trying to, you know, undermine their efforts.
Isn't that the point?
And that's politics getting in the way again.
This feels like the Conservative Party getting into general election mode on perhaps the only issue they've got a chance of winning on. Another issue in the papers today, I want to draw attention, Sarah, is Jeremy Hunt. There are red wall Conservatives asking for him to get the chop because they think he's too timid. He won't give a tax cut. The Tories should be the party of low tax.
Yeah, I mean,
is this the case now? A lot of Conservatives worrying about their future, worrying about their seats, and Jeremy Hunt's in the way.
I think a lot of problem. I think the government has rendered itself very unpopular with the stealth taxes that it's been doing. You know, basically freezing the threshold for taxation so that more and more people fall into the higher brackets of tax, and therefore they pay more tax. There was some talk a few days ago that pensioners might be caught up in this, and it's this enormous act of self-harm by the Tory party, because the Tory party is seen as the party of low taxation and also, you know, of individual choice. The whole point about conservatism is that you make decisions yourself about what you want to do with your money and what you want to do with your life. You're not subscribing to a sort of Labour-esque nanny state prescription lifestyle. And Hunt has been very firm in that he says he's not going to do anything about these taxes, and I think that's a huge mistake. I really do think it is.
Yeah, I mean, because if the Tories can't give a tax break, if they can't stop the boats, then what can they do? And people will just vote for change,
I mean, the thing is that people will vote for the Conservatives if they start to act like Conservatives again. And that's, you know, because people who vote Conservative generally are small state, low taxation people. They're not someone, you know, I mean, Labour can't, I mean, the other thing is that if the Tories don't cut taxes, Labour certainly aren't going to cut taxes. So, and, you know, what we saw last week in those two by-elections was basically Conservative voters staying away. They just didn't show up. And if that happens at the general election, then, you know, Labour will take control, and then there will be a whole other set of problems, and we certainly won't see tax cuts, I wouldn't have thought, under Labour.
No.
Well, they're the party of high taxes traditionally, although we have the highest taxes since World War II, so can it get any worse? Oh, stay with us, Sarah, please, because moving on, the Labour MP Stella Creasy has accused the government of denying refugees of being kicked out of hotels with a week's notice by the Home Office. She says she has evidence of this, provided the following receipt from a hotel.
So, for those listening on the radio, we can see that a letter issued on the 19th of October asks the tenants to vacate the premises by the 27th of October. This comes as the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, confirmed the use of hotels to accommodate migrants will start to slow down significantly in the coming months.
Well, to help us break down the accusation is GB News political correspondent Olivia Utley. Hello to you, Olivia. Great to speak to you as ever. So here we go again. Illegal immigration is being used as a political football. This time Stella Creasy wading in, accusing the government of some pretty hairy things, but the government's denying them.
The government is denying them, and it's hard to work out exactly what Stella Creasy's information is behind this. We don't know if this was just a one-off incident, what the background was. But according to the government, they only plan to start closing migrant hotels in January. According to Robert Jenrick's statement yesterday, the government wants to end contracts with 50 migrant hotels in January and then a further 50 in March. Robert Jenrick says, and if you look at the numbers, I'm inclined to believe him on the face of it, that the reason they are able to start ending contracts with hotels for migrants is because, A, the number of migrants has gone down since last year. We've seen a decrease of 15,000 migrants crossing the Channel in 2023 compared to 2022. And B, because the government has managed to ramp up the number of caseworkers processing migrant refugee claims. So at the beginning of this year, there were 400 claims being processed per week. That number is now 4,500, which obviously means that the bottleneck is lessening somewhat. Rishi Sunak said that by the end of this year, by the end of 2023, he would have eliminated the backlog of migrants waiting for their claims to be processed, which on average can take 430 days, over a year, for a migrant's claim to be processed. He said he would eliminate that backlog by the end of 2023. He hasn't eliminated it. It was 92,000 and it's now 55,000. But as you can see, it has gone down quite a bit. So Robert Jenrick says that the reason they are able to talk about closing some of these hotels, bear in mind that it's not by any means all of the hotels. We think 400 hotels are being used for migrants and 100 of them will close in the next 6 months. But the reason is because government policies are finally working, and because the weather this year has been a little bit more difficult than last year, making migrant crossings more tricky.
OK, thank you, Olivia. Olivia Utley there. It's PMQs, of course, later today as well, so we'll be talking to Olivia about that a bit later. But, Sarah, it just smells of political tinkering, this, the idea that they can now suddenly close these hotels. As Martin said, because you've got an election around the corner, the speculation, of course, that they're also in marginal seats, looks... Just all really whiffy, and people will go, well, if you can do this now, why now?
Well, because obviously the election has focused their minds, and the by-elections last week has also focused their minds, and they understand that this is something that they really desperately do need to deal with, because it's a huge vote loser.
And don't you think, though, that this just feels like, rearranging the deck chairs? Because if they're not in hotels, presumably they will be evicted, and then what? They'll be trying to find social housing, and they may get preferential treatment over British people, certainly over British homeless. Yeah. So you're not solving the problem unless you stop the boats. You're simply moving the problem elsewhere.
Well, we should really get Robert Jenrick back on and ask him all of those questions, because where are they going? Where are you going to put them now? Is there going to be a different... I mean, as we've just heard, the Bibi Stockholm is now £800 a night, so I'm not sure that's materially any better than keeping them in hotels.
Do either of you have any idea how we've ended up in this position? Like, what has happened?
I think it's a combination of... it's been a sort of combination of wokeness on the part of ministers. So the Conservative Party has always had this sort of image of being quite tough on migrants, and in the last few years, there's been a sort of sense that they've been trying to, as it were, win the hearts of people a bit. So they've been sort of erring on the side of, I think, trying to be more receptive, to try and silence the sort of shouty
left. Get away from the nasty parts.
And the problem is with doing that is that the thing is, if you're a Conservative government, you could never please the left, because they're never going to like you anyway, because they hate you viscerally. So there's no point in even trying. So you're wasting your time. But what it's done is it's landed them with this sort of huge, great big problem, which they now have a limited time frame to solve.
And that's the next question, Sarah, because you know how the Conservative Party works perhaps better than anybody that comes on this show. And the problem with Brexit is that we had two Conservative parties. We had the Wets, as you might want to call them, the Remainer, Shire Tories, then we had the Red Wall Tories. We certainly have that over immigration. Coming towards a general election cycle, can those same people be whipped to suddenly be strong on borders, or is it just not within their hearts to do so?
I think it's just very difficult. I think the government has an incredibly narrow path to navigate. I mean, the reason a lot of people... The issue with immigration is not really, I don't think, one of cultural. It's not a cultural thing. It's more a kind of practical thing. It's like, well, suddenly I can't get a place at my local school because there are just too many people.
GP.
Or I can't get a job appointment with my GP because there are just too many people. It's the pressure that it puts on public services and local services for people, and that's where they feel it, and that's where they get upset, because they say, well, actually, you know, I pay my taxes, why can't I access these services? Which I don't think that's actually that unreasonable. And it's up to the government to manage it in such a way that it doesn't have that impact on people. And it's failed to do that. I mean, I'm not going to... You know, I'm a Conservative, but I have to be honest, you know, I don't look at the way they've handled this and think, wow, that was brilliant. I think you've actually done a terrible job.
I also wonder, when we consider how we've got to this position where we've got this amount of money being spent every day, housing people who want to live here, and it hasn't been forward planned. I just wonder whether politicians don't feel the impacts of mass immigration in their life every day, like somebody might who's had lived in a terraced house in Rochdale their whole life, run a small business, and suddenly their community is so different. Well, I mean, what politicians living in Westminster have no idea.
Well, I mean, all politicians start off with very good intentions, and they all start off living ordinary lives, and then as they progress through their career, they become more and more insulated. Well, it's difficult if you're a minister and you're in a car, or you're going from car to cabinet. I suppose you probably don't feel these things quite so keenly.
Well, they might feel it keenly when the electorate kick them in the backside at the next general election anyway.
Nicely put, Martin. Right, thank you, Sarah. OK.
Now, moving on, Gaza's health ministry says hospitals and medical facilities in the Strip have completely collapsed as the UN says its humanitarian efforts are in jeopardy, with it having less than 24 hours of fuel left.
That's right. All of this follows more than 2 weeks of a heavy bombing campaign and a full blockade on the tiny enclave home to over 2 million people as a retaliation for Hamas attacks earlier this month that killed 1,400 Israelis.
And the head of the UN says he is deeply concerned about the clear violations of international law taking place in Gaza.
It is important to also recognise the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. The Palestinian people have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation. They have seen their land steadily devoured by settlements and plagued by violence, their economy stifled, their people displaced and their homes demolished. Their hopes for a political solution to their plight have been vanishing. But the grievances of the Palestinian people cannot justify the appalling attacks by Hamas, and those appalling attacks cannot justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people.
Let's get the latest now, live from Mark White in Tel Aviv. Good morning, Mark. Very powerful statement there from Guterres, particularly using the phrase collective punishment. What are you hearing there in Tel Aviv about how this speech has been received?
Well, absolute anger at the comments made by the UN Secretary-General. Some politicians and commentators saying that this man is no longer welcome in Israel, others, including the Israeli ambassador to the UN, calling for Antonio Guterres to resign because of what they say is comments effectively justifying what Hamas did on October the 7th. Interestingly, we heard from the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, just a short time ago as well, being interviewed on GBNews. He said that he believed the UN Secretary-General's comments were wrong and were undiplomatic, is what he said. And he agreed, I think, with a lot of Israeli commentators that although the UN Secretary General was saying there could be no justification for those attacks on October the 7th, it appears in the statement he gave that he was doing just that.
OK, Mark, a quick point that you were speaking earlier about Hamas possibly meeting with Hezbollah, and that, of course, threatens to spread this conflict to the north in Lebanon and really exacerbate this spreading throughout the whole region. How concerned are locals about that in Tel Aviv?
There is real concern about a wider regional conflict here, and that Hassan Nasrallah, head of Hezbollah's meeting with the leaders of Islamic Jihad, of course the second largest terror group in Gaza, and also with leaders of Hamas, is very concerning indeed. They spoke about an axis of resistance to try to ensure victory in Gaza, and the Hezbollah-controlled Al-Manar television station said that they mentioned as part of this axis Iran and Syria as well. And we saw overnight in Syria a number of airstrikes on Syrian military positions in southwestern Syria. The Syrian authorities confirmed that 8 Syrian soldiers had been killed and 7 others were injured. Now, Israel confirmed the strikes, but they said that was in response to rockets fired from Syria into Israel. They landed in open spaces and caused no injuries. And in addition to that, from the Hezbollah terrorists in southern Lebanon, more fire coming over that border into northern Israel, and confirmation from the Israeli Defense Forces that they have now taken out, they say, 6 terrorist cells that were launching munitions and missiles over that border.
OK, thank you, Mark. We're going to be talking to Mark later in the show as well. Your views are coming, and we're going to get to those as well after the break. And also still to come, BBC Director General Tim Davies facing a group of Tory MPs to find out why they don't call Hamas a terrorist group. Don't go anywhere.
Hello, very good morning. It's Alex Burkill here with your latest GB News weather update. Away from eastern Scotland, many places will see some drier weather for a time today, but further rain to come. In the southeast, it's a wet start first thing. If you're about to head out the door, watch out for some heavy rain on the roads, could cause some problems, but the heavy rain is clearing through as we go through the morning. Otherwise, then across much of England, Wales and Northern Ireland, there'll be some dry, bright weather into the afternoon, but a different story for eastern Scotland. Here it is going to be cloudy and wet through much of the day. Temperatures near normal for the time of year, highs around 14, possibly 15 Celsius in the south, a bit cooler further north. Later on today, we are going to see a band of rain pushing its way in from the southwest. That's gradually going to make its way northeastwards, bringing some heavy rain across parts of Northern Ireland, Wales, in the southwest, and then later into the Midlands as we go through the early hours of Thursday. Staying quite cloudy and wet across parts of Scotland. As a result, it is going to be a relatively mild night, not quite as chilly as last night, where some places did dip below freezing. As we go through Thursday, then, that rain continues to push its way northeastwards into more northern and eastern parts of England. Could be heavy at times across parts of East Anglia, and notice some hefty showers following in behind, some heavy downpours possible around south coastal parts. Also some further rain for eastern parts of Scotland. That could be a little bit heavier than the rain we're going to see through today. Temperatures similar, perhaps a touch higher than today for some.
Now, still to come, with youth crime and antisocial behaviour on the rise, is boxing the best way to get kids off of British streets? This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News, the People's Channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
It's 10 o'clock on Wednesday, the 25th of October. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Martin Daubney and me, Bev Turner.
And today, the BBC's Director General Tim Davie is due to meet Tory MPs this afternoon. It's expected he'll be asked as to why explain the national broadcaster doesn't refer to Hamas as terrorists. We'll have all the latest.
More heavy rain forecast and flooding is to be expected in the aftermath of Storm Babette for many parts of the country today. Our reporter Anna Riley can give us the latest from Sheffield.
Here in Catcliffe in Rotherham, 250 residents were evacuated at the weekend, and the clean-up mission continues for people who have lost their homes.
And tackling youth crime. With antisocial behaviour and crime on the rise, could boxing be the way of getting young people in and off of British streets?
For us, we are allowing them to gain control of their thoughts. So what you have to always realise is consequence. So actions have consequences.
Have you done any boxing?
I've got the wrong frame for it. I'm too tall, too heavy, and I get hit a lot. No, and I break my fingers all the time playing football. So boxing, I'd be on the floor.
But good boxers are tall, though. That can't surely be a...
It's good to have a long reach, but it means you fight heavier people. But boxing for young lads is a fantastic thing.
Yeah.
I did a load of work on that when I was into men's mental health, campaigning on that, and I saw it firsthand in Belfast, in Nottinghamshire, in Derbyshire, and across Yorkshire.
Yeah.
It really works.
Any sport, let's face it, is good for kids and teens, keeps them on the straight and narrow. Let us know your thoughts this morning, GBviews at gbnews.com. But first, here's your news with Ray.
Thanks, guys. Good morning. 1 minute past 10, our top stories this hour. Israel intensified airstrikes on Gaza overnight, rejecting calls for a ceasefire. The military says it targeted Hamas infrastructure following one of the deadliest days for Palestinians. There are growing concerns that the conflict could spread across the region. This morning, the leaders of terrorist groups reportedly met to discuss a so-called resistance axis against Israel. Lebanon's Hezbollah leader is said to have held talks with the head of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Well, the United Nations is warning the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is deepening, with more than a third of hospitals being forced to close because of damage or a lack of fuel. Doctors say patients are showing signs of disease caused by overcrowding and poor sanitation. The UN says it may have had to halt its operations because fuel is running out. Israel blocked its delivery to prevent Hamas from seizing supplies. Meanwhile, the UN Secretary-General has reiterated calls for a ceasefire to allow the safe delivery of aid. Antonio Guterres says he's concerned by what he called clear violations of humanitarian law. The Palestinian Red Crescent confirmed 8 trucks crossed the Rafah border yesterday, but the UN says dozens more are still waiting to enter from Egypt.
I'm deeply concerned about the clear violations of international humanitarian law that we are witnessing in Gaza. Let me be clear, no party to an armed conflict is above international humanitarian law. It is important to also recognize the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. The Palestinian people have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation. They have seen their land steadily devoured by settlements and plagued by violence.
Well, speaking on GB News, Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick has criticised the Secretary-General's comments.
Well, I thought the Secretary-General's comments were wrong, they were unacceptable, and they were undiplomatic. He implied that there was a justification for what happened to Israel 2 weeks ago. There is no justification for murderous, barbaric terrorist attacks on innocent civilians, children being killed, burnt, kidnapped. You know, nobody should be trying to make a justification for that.
MPs are expected to vote later over whether Peter Bone should be suspended from the Commons. It's after a parliamentary panel found the member for Wellingborough committed acts of bullying and one act of sexual misconduct against a male staff member in 2012 and 2013. If the recommended 6-week suspension is approved, it could trigger a recall petition and lead to a by-election. Mr Bone denies the allegations and has vowed to continue representing his constituents. A panel is due to decide whether 5 Met police officers are guilty of gross misconduct over the stop and search of 2 black athletes. Ricardo dos Santos and his partner Bianca Williams were stopped in their car in London in 2020. They were handcuffed, searched for weapons and drugs and separated from their 3-month-old son. Nothing was found and no arrests were made, with the pair publicly accusing the force of racism. All 5 officers have denied any wrongdoing. A watchdog says its worst nightmares have come true after thousands of AI-generated images showing child abuse were shared on a dark web forum. The Internet Watch Foundation says criminals are now using the faces and bodies of real children who have appeared in abuse imagery to create new images. In a single month, the IWF said it investigated over 11,000 shared pictures. It said the most convincing images would be difficult for even trained analysts to distinguish from real photos, and it would become harder for police to protect children. UK astronauts could soon be heading into orbit on an all-British mission for the first time ever. The UK Space Agency has signed an agreement with Axiom Space. It's an American-based firm to try to make it happen. Astronauts would spend up to 2 weeks to carry out scientific experiments and participate in educational activities. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now let's get back to Martin and Bev.
Welcome back. It is 10:06 on Wednesday morning. Thank you for joining Britain's Newsroom on GB News. You have been getting in touch at home. We've been talking about the Bibby Stockholm, £800 a night, same as the suite in the Savoy.
That's right, the King Room Deluxe, no less.
Well, Lynn has said, I don't blame the asylum seekers. It doesn't matter how much it costs. I wouldn't want to live on a barge either.
And John says this, how much longer are we going to be taken for mugs? The government should put British people first, like the poor people affected by the floods. Pay for them first, rather than the migrants.
A lot of you talking along those lines. Mick has said this country is a disgrace. We've got normal families having to go to food banks, yet we're happy to pay £800 per night for asylum seekers. It is madness.
And Steve, straight to the point, come on, this is just crazy. It's a money-making scheme to house them on that barge. I don't want my hard money wasted on that.
Yeah. And also, you've been getting in touch about the Conservatives. We had Sarah Vine here this morning. If you missed that, where were you? You've missed a lot of interesting stuff. Well, Sue has said, don't just get rid of Jeremy Hunt, get rid of Rishi Sunak too. Neither of them has got enough personality to win the general election for the Tories, not even against Wimpy Starmer.
Whereas Phil says, I like Jeremy Hunt. He seems a clever man. I feel sorry for him, with the other Tory MPs stabbing him in the back. Not impressed. And there we have it. Till the bitter end, a divided Tory party.
Keep your messages coming. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email, as always. So the BBC's Director General, Tim Davie, is due to meet Tory MPs this afternoon.
Yes, expected he'll be asked to explain why the national broadcaster doesn't refer to Hamas as terrorists.
However, it is understood that Davie's appearance was arranged in July, before the controversy. So joining us now to discuss is former BBC executive and presenter Roger Bolton. Hi, Roger. Good to see you. So this meeting was originally arranged so that Tim Davie could be questioned about whether the BBC was biased against the Conservative Party. And now, given events of the last 2.5 weeks, they are also accused of being biased politically in terms of this conflict. Explain your position on it. Why do you think the BBC shouldn't call Hamas terrorists?
Well, the BBC is always accused of being biased, usually by the government in power. You remember Alistair Campbell? Remember all those trolls? Oh, going back, Mrs. Thatcher, whatever. So they're always going to get it in the neck. Somebody said when the country is divided, the BBC is on the rack. It's, by the way, not the national broadcaster. You keep referring to that. It is the BBC, British Broadcasting Corporation. It doesn't. The national broadcaster sort of suggests that it should be representing the views of the government in some way, and that's not the case. The problem it faces is that its fundamental job is to report and to be believed. And if it gets into the business of calling particular groups by a particular name, it may not be believed in those places you most want it to be believed. And also, what is terrorism? Is, for example, what the Chinese government is doing to the Uyghurs terrorism? I would certainly say that. What is happening in the Burmese, Burma's government is to the people there. Where do you stop? It's very difficult. We're in the middle of a propaganda war here, and there is suffering on every side. And understandably, all those sides want their case put forward in the most vivid way. The best thing the BBC can do is just report.
But Roger, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. With the greatest of respect, the nitpicking that you just did then about who the BBC is very much demonstrates why the British public feel that it isn't spending the taxpayers' money appropriately. The idea that it's not the national broadcaster is we don't feel, the British people don't feel that is the case.
I don't think it's nitpicking. Well, I don't think it's nitpicking. You say the British public feels this. Actually, the British public fundamentally still supports and trusts the BBC News. Of course, it's not perfect and it makes mistakes. But the suggestion that the idea that it should represent Britain is a difficult one. The BBC should be reporting objectively and as far as it can. And it has a world service, and we want to be believed around the world, don't we, for what we say? And if people think it's just the BBC is the mouthpiece of government, then you're in trouble. You know, if you think world service is of value, that matters. It's not nitpicking.
OK, Roger, on the topic of nitpicking, if you don't think Hamas should be called terrorists, what would you call people who murder, decapitate, set fire, and then abduct and put into hostage people? What would you call them?
Hold on, we're talking about what the BBC should call them, not what I should call them.
No, you agree with the BBC's position. You made that clear. So I'm asking you, what would you call them if they're not terrorists? Words are important.
Those are acts of terror. As I do think the bombing that's going on in parts of Israel at the moment, with the thousands being killed and so on, are also, in their own way, acts of terror. I don't say I don't have any time for Hamas at all, or Hezbollah, or anything like that. But it doesn't help if you want to get people to believe what's going on, if you start adding those epithets and so on, you should say, simply report the atrocities that Hamas has committed. I mean, I think that... Sorry, Karen.
I was going to say, but what it does, Roger, because the BBC is not calling that the events of October the 7th a terrorist attack, everybody's very quickly moving on now to look at the action that Israel is taking. If October the 7th is viewed globally as a terrorist attack, we would still be dissecting in much greater detail what happened that day and what a proportionate response might be. That's a separate conversation. But with the BBC describing them as, well, some governments, including the UK, call them a terrorist organisation, do you see it takes a lot of the it takes the power out of how awful that day was?
Well, I don't think so, but I'm happy. And by the way, the BBC has talked about terrorist acts. There's a difference between this.
Sorry, we're getting Roger back. Sorry, we have our next guest, Jim Dale, there waiting. I think we've had a technical issue. Sorry, Roger, carry on.
I was trying to say that. There's a difference between saying things a terrorist act, which clearly it was, and labelling the organisation terrorism. For me, the most important thing is we want people to believe the awful truth that reporters on the ground are revealing, and they should actually spell out increasingly detail what happened in Israel. But also they need, if they can get in, to report the deaths that are happening in Gaza. Now, it'll be very difficult for the Director General tonight, this afternoon. But I remember an occasion 40 years ago in the Falklands conflict, almost an identical situation. And the BBC chairman then was called George Howard, was a large man, and it was called an ox roasting. And it said there was deep entrails on the ground. So I think it'll be tough tonight.
Roger, what would you say to people out there who say the BBC aren't normally shy to kind of take a position on things like Brexit, things like climate change, but reluctant to take a position on calling Hamas terrorists, but quite quick to take a position on the bombing of the hospital car park as, attributable as the fault of Israel. Before that was so what I'm trying to get at here, is there a predisposition in the BBC mindset to, if you like, side with one side over the other?
No, and I could challenge all the things you're saying about Brexit and everything else, because, dropping those in. I mean, direct question, there isn't a BBC mindset. Have you ever worked in the place?
Yes.
There are over 250 correspondents, so about 45, broadcasting in 45 languages, a whole raft of people. There's no general conspiracy. Of course, everybody has prejudices, and you've got to watch out for them. But the BBC just desperately tries to say what the truth is. When it gets it wrong, it says. The New York Times, by the way, made that same mistake the BBC made, and the New York Times and the BBC apologized for that mistake. Well, they shouldn't make it again, but they apologized. Lots of other people made that mistake and haven't apologized. And by the way, what the BBC said was, according to Hamas, now, it didn't have an Israeli response at that time, and it should have been more skeptical. But it will inevitably make mistakes. The question is just to apologize quickly. And is this symptomatic of a worldview? It isn't. I don't believe that at all. Just like, on other subjects.
I think when it comes to the naming of Hamas as terrorists, that isn't just down to the individual producers or researchers of any particular output. That is the style guide of the British Broadcasting Corporation. So that can't be attributed to individuals. I've also worked at the BBC. My suggestion would also be that the BBC is employing a lot of people who are privately educated, who can afford to work as youngsters, are not getting paid a lot of money, they've bankrolled by the family to be there. And so, unfortunately, I do think there is a collective mindset often working within the offices of the BBC, which doesn't represent most people, actually, in this country. Would you suggest there's any sort of truth to that? There is a London, a very Westminster mindset, actually, so it becomes a bit of an echo chamber.
Right, well, someone from Carlisle who went to Liverpool University and didn't go to public school and went to state school, okay, I'll give you an answer, which is, I agree with a lot of that, because there is a real danger now. I mean, it's like Victorian conditions where people are employed on short-term contracts, and you're true. The danger is, particularly in London, that only people with wealthy parents, get into the place. But what we've got to have that for, that's the reason for making sure the BBC comes from Salford, Leeds, everything else, and it makes it absolutely right that people like you should scrutinise what it does. But what you shouldn't do, really shouldn't do, is assume there's a worldview shared by everybody who works at the BBC. There are policies it has, and it's tried to explain this policy, and it's a difficult one. But let me make it clear. What happened clearly in Gaza rather just a story. What happened in Israel was an appalling terrorist act. Totally disgusting. But it doesn't help it if the BBC isn't believed because it's calling that organization a terrorist organization. You want to be believed in Arab capitals, Arab countries. You want to believe in Gaza. You want people to acknowledge the reality of what Hamas is doing. And it's best done, in my view, and I think the BBC's view, for which I don't represent the BBC is simply reporting the facts. And the facts are horrible enough.
OK, Roger, we appreciate your experience, your insights. That's exactly what we do here on GB News. We show all sides of the story. BBC could try a little harder. But good to see you, Roger Bolton. Thank you so much for joining us.
And I have worked for the BBC loads for years, and I was the only person on every show I ever went on who had my political viewpoint. So there we go.
And that office back there, full of young people from all sorts of backgrounds, educations, nationalities, political persuasions. We are representing you, and that is why you're tuning in your droves. So thank you for joining us.
Great debate, though. Moving on now. So parts of the UK devastated by floods are now facing a yellow fog warning. The Met Office said there is a small chance that homes and businesses could be flooded.
Now, if you're wondering why we are facing such bad weather, Environment Secretary Therese Coffey had this explanation.
Forecasting, predicting weather normally, because most of our rain tends to come in from the west. And we've got that pretty much down to a fine art. This was rain coming from the other way.
Hang on, did she just say the rain comes from the west and we've got that down to a fine art?
They've got that down to fine, but it's the wrong type of rain.
The rain came from the wrong way. Right, Jim Dale, senior meteorologist at British Weather Services, friend of the show. Jim, can you just get the rain to just fall in the right way, please, and then everything would be all right for Therese Coffey? You had one job, Jim.
Yeah, it's about that, isn't it? I'm gobsmacked at that one, to be honest with you. And it actually shows. I'll tell you what she's doing there. She's shooting the messenger. She's basically saying, oh, you know, meteorologists got it all wrong. And, you know, this is why we got the floods and this is why people lost their homes. And sadly, there's some deaths along the way. She's the wrong person in the wrong place at the wrong time. And this goes to the heart of government, to be honest with you, in terms of, I'll use the word inept because that was an inept comment. Inept people in those positions of power doing saying what they're saying, making people like ourselves in my profession and the Met Office included, that this is somehow our fault, that people are losing their livelihoods, their homes, and even their lives due to meteorologists. Well, I've got news for her. That's just all wrong, and as I say, gobsmacked.
And Jim, there is history in this blame game, isn't there? We had the wrong type of snow in 1991, that crippled British Rail. And then we had Teflon leaves that fell too fast in 2010, also crippling the trains. Isn't this just down to one thing? And it's the British are terrible at planning for any form of extreme weather.
Yeah, we are, Martin. Well, we are and we're not. I think the warnings that we're giving out are the first step. And if people take note of those things, then, you know, actions can be taken, property can be saved, potentially, and lives can be saved on the back of that. So warnings are the first thing. But I think the next stage, you're dead right. This is a conversation that needs to happen. Where are we now? What have we got to do? Particularly for these poor people in River Valley areas. Where you know this is going to happen again into the future. We won't get into climate change, but nonetheless, you know, they are susceptible to this. And so government, who have been in power for 13 years, seem to have done next to nothing. And when it happens, and then come out in an House of Commons committee and suggest somehow or other rain was coming from the south, so it wasn't the right direction, and it's all its fault, or it's all meteorologists' fault. No, sorry, not at all, Theresa Coffey.
Jim, the other thing that, of course, people are saying, and I've seen this with my own eyes, and there's some brilliant videos online, is that the trouble is councils have not swept up any leaves this year. And we had no mow May in West London, so we had all of this grass that grew on all the pavements. It looked disgusting. Then they came and mowed it in about September. There's still grass all over the pavement. And the grids are full, aren't they, of all of this debris because the council hasn't done any leaf sweeping. And so the drains are blocked. That's part of the problem.
So Bev, behind me is a lot of trees. I mean, in a place called Keep Hill Wood in Wickham. You can probably see it now, yeah. And a lot of those things haven't dropped their leaves. But to be honest with you, that would have been a minuscule reason for blockages, drains, etc. Yeah, it's always part of the equations. Martin's already mentioned the leaves on the line and that type of thing. It happens periodically, it happens every year in some shape or form. But primarily the reasons for seeing what we've seen in the last few days, and even now this morning in central southern England, down towards the Isle of Wight, there's been some very heavy rain there as well. You get these events that occur that are out of kilter from, let's just say, normal weather, extreme weather, and yeah, they will always catch people out to a certain degree, despite the warnings that we're given. But I just go back to where we started, Bev and Martin, and that is, for a government minister to sit there and start blaming the direction of the wind in terms of where the rain is coming from on the catastrophe that's happened to some people watching this programme today and wondering and scratching their heads saying, no, it's lack of planning, lack of money and lack of endeavour by this government. They've 13 years to do something about it and they've done next to zero.
You're right. All right, thank you, Jim. Good to see you. If you've been affected by this at home, by the way, please email us. In fact, send us your photos as well. We'll try and get some photos on.
And no doubt, rather than doing the whole work of clearing drains, dredging the canals and keeping the waterways running, they'll just blame climate change.
Yeah, too easy that, isn't it? It's not the case. And also, I think a big problem as well, I mean, as Jim said there, he's sat there in High Wycombe with the beautiful trees around him and the fields, and we've got so many people are concreting over their driveways now. So we've changed so much of what particularly our urban areas look like, and there isn't the place for the water to soak away. We're gutted for you if you have been affected like this. I know we're being a bit light-hearted about Therese Coffey saying that she'd got the rain down to a fine art. But if you have been struck by this, devastating, awful to have your house trashed in that way. Send us your pictures of what you're dealing with. Send us your stories. gbviews@gbnews.com.
Yeah, still to come. We'll stick with the weather and bring you the aftermath of Storm Babbitt across the UK. We're GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Welcome back. It's 10:27. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with myself, Martin Daubney and Bev Turner.
That was quick eye movement there, Martin. It went from 10:26 to 10:27 and he was on the money at that very moment. We've got so much to come in the show this morning before midday. We've got PMQs, of course, at midday. But we've got some brilliant guests coming up. We've got a lot of chat on immigration today.
Loads.
Bibby Stockholm, the £800 a day. The fact the government said they're going to close 100 of those hotels which are housing migrants in the next 6 months, which is remarkable they can do that. I wonder if it's got anything to do with the fact there's an election coming up. Must be a coincidence.
A lot of people don't believe them, and you may well be one of them out there.
Keep your emails coming, gbviews@gbnews.com. But now,
moving on, a fresh deluge of rain is expected in parts of the UK already hit by flooding as a result of Storm Babbitt as the clean-up continues.
We are joined now by Anna Riley from Rotherham, who's joined by Rose Kent at her home. Good morning, Anna. We were just talking about the impacts of these storms and how devastating it is for people whose houses get damaged. What's happened there in Rotherham?
Millie, go away, I'm on camera. Good morning. Yes, you'll be able to see here we're in Rose's conservatory, and you can just see the devastation behind us. The sofas are overturned, a television's come down, the floor is full of mud, and within the water that's come in, it's sewage water that's come in as well, so it's an unpleasant smell, it's getting mouldy, but she's still waiting for the electrics to come back on, so she can't yet plug in a dehumidifier to try and dry out her house. And just tell us, Rose, you've been living here 30 years and this is the 3rd time you've been flooded now, but you were told back in 2007, those massive floods here 16 years ago, that better flood defences would be put in place and that this wouldn't happen again. Yeah, we were, and it's absolutely devastating to see this has happened again to such an extent, to have another 5.5 feet in my house again. This is my home. Never in a month's Sundays would we dream that it would happen to this height again in our house. You know, wanting to know some of the causes why it's happened. So, yeah. And what did happen? Because it was Saturday, wasn't it, that this all happened and people were evacuated, 250 people in this village evacuated from their homes. Yeah, so we did have an initial flood watch warning via texts and things at about 2:30 in the morning, and then by 4:30 we had the local fire brigade come round and ask us to evacuate. We then spent another couple of hours trying to move things upstairs and try and save some things, and then we finally left at 6:30 in the morning, and it was a good 2 to 3 inches throughout the whole of downstairs. And how are you feeling? Because you have tried to flood-proof your home in a way, haven't you? You've changed the layout of your house. Tell us about that. Yeah, so following the last flood, we decided to put some interventions in place just in case it happened again. So we put our fuse board on the first floor and the electrics come down to make it safer that way. We've put tiles on the floor and the walls, and hopefully this is a bit of a tester to see whether it does work, and you know, can other people in the future perhaps do this if it's going to reduce the impact that it's going to have on you following floods. And it's going to be a lot of waiting around, isn't it? You're waiting around today for the insurance to come, you're still waiting for your electric to come back on. You're currently living in an Airbnb at the moment, and you had to evacuate your pets as well, didn't you? Yes, yeah, so evacuated pets, and we've still got small pets here in the house as well, so obviously we're coming back regular just to make sure that they're okay and they're warm and not getting too cold and damp.
And who would you blame for this, or what do you think needs to happen to stop this happening again?
I think for us on our local area, following the last flood, what's happened is there's been a huge building development up on the hill, what's gone on is that this has impacted on all the drainage that's running down to us. So the developers have built and built.
Sorry to interrupt you. We've just got a plant and sweeper hire coming past, so sorry for the noise. But Bev, I believe you might have a question yourself for Rose.
Well, Anna, we were just sitting here wondering, and obviously you are right in the centre of the action there, so apologies for the sound, but there's literally the clean-up operation going on around you. We were just wondering, what did the council or the local authorities say they were going to do to prevent the flooding that they didn't do?
Yeah, so Bev's just asking there about the council, what measures did they say they'd put in place? Because I know in 2007 you sort of accepted, being victims of the floods to save hospitals in the area, but what assurances did you get this time?
That, the flood defences, would be maintained, and the system in process, as the floodgates opened, would be working in proper order, so to reduce the impact of any of the water flow coming down to us.
Thank you. And what other residents have told me as well is that, they're seeing people from the council on the ground doing the clean-up job, but not necessarily seeing their local councillors coming around and giving that assurance. And there's been questions as well about how the Environment Agency has handled this as well.
OK, all right. Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Rose, for letting us have a peek at the misery of that in Rotherham.
And this has been going on for years, successive governments. Remember, they used to call them the Wallies with the Wellies. Ed Miliband, David Cameron, they always go when a flood starts, but they never actually spend the money and do the graft to stop it happening in the first place. Right,
still to come this morning, millionaire migrant hotel king, a caravan park tycoon, has recorded a fortune in profits after taxpayers handed over £3.5 million a day last year to the Home Office contracts to house asylum seekers.
And get her out of here, said the country. Now there's rumours she's heading to the jungle. Former Prime Minister Liz Truss has addressed comments that she'll take part in this year's I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here.
That and much more after your morning's news with Ray Addison.
Thanks, guys. 10:33, our top stories. Israel intensified airstrikes on Gaza overnight. The military says it targeted Hamas infrastructure following one of the deadliest days for Palestinians. There are growing concerns that the conflict could spread across the region. This morning, the leaders of terrorist groups reportedly met to discuss a so-called resistance axis against Israel. Lebanon's Hezbollah leader is said to have held talks with the head of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Meanwhile, the United Nations is warning the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is deepening, with more than a third of its hospitals being forced to close because of damage or a lack of fuel. Doctors say patients are showing signs of disease caused by overcrowding and poor sanitation. The UN says it may have to halt its operations because fuel is running out. Israel blocked its delivery to prevent Hamas from seizing supplies. MPs are expected to vote later on whether Peter Bone should be suspended from the Commons. It's after a parliamentary panel found the member for Wellingborough committed acts of bullying and one act of sexual misconduct against a male staff member back in 2012 and 2013. If the recommended 6-week suspension is approved, it could trigger a recall petition and lead to a by-election. He denies the allegations. A panel is due to decide whether 5 Met police officers are guilty of gross misconduct over the stop and search of 2 black athletes. Ricardo dos Santos and his partner Bianca Williams were stopped in their car in London in 2020. Nothing was found, no arrests were made, with the pair publicly accusing the force of racism. All 5 officers have denied any wrongdoing. You can get more on all of those stories on our website, gbnews.com.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Back to Bevan Martin in a moment, but first let's take a look at the markets. The pound will buy you $1.2139 and €1.1469. Price of gold, £1,624.15, that's per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,396 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Still to come, could boxing classes put street crime on the ropes? We'll hear about the great work that one gym in Lancashire is doing in just a few moments.
And this is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like? I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Welcome back. It's bang on 10:40 a.m. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with myself, Martin Daubney, and Bev Turner.
So boxing has always been a sport associated with getting young people in and off the streets. And as antisocial behaviour offences continue to grow as a problem for the police and local residents, could it be part of the solution?
I love this story. Our North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper visited a boxing gym in Lancashire to find out about a new initiative that could help to tackle this important issue.
At this local boxing gym in Kirkham, Lancashire, the gloves are well and truly on. In response to concerns over youth antisocial behaviour, a new initiative is encouraging young people to get into the ring instead.
I was exactly as they are.
Adam Little grew up in Kirkham. He used boxing as an outlet, eventually becoming a professional. Now he owns his own gym and wants to give back to his local community.
You find a lot about who you are in these four walls, and sometimes that's all I need. For us, we are allowing them to gain control of their thoughts. So what you have to always realise is consequence. So actions have consequences. Humans are allowed to make mistakes, but you have to learn from them. Otherwise, you're just going to continue to make that same mistake.
Kirkham is not unique in its issues with antisocial behaviour. It's a problem being faced by councils up and down the country on a daily basis.
We're all very proud of our town. We want Kirkham to be the best it can be. What we need to do is support and tackle the root cause of some of the issues. And that's why we're working in partnership with the police and with Adam. And we think it's a worthwhile investment from the Town Council to sponsor and support this initiative in full.
As part of Operation Centurion, Lancashire Police has been given £2 million of government funding in order to crack down on antisocial behaviour in the county.
It gives us more money to put those extra resources and those extra visible resources on the streets, which people like to see, because it's that little bit of reassurance. And this is the sort of thing that builds the bridges between us, the community, and more importantly, the kids. We're trying to give you that diversionary thing, so you don't think about going around getting bored, causing the problems, giving people abuse, causing the damage, and all the low-level things that really impact all the community on a higher level.
Moving forward, this initiative hopes to reduce the level of antisocial behaviour in the area, ensuring that ultimately the young people of Kirkham are learning to box clever. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
Gives me joy that watching kids doing sport and working out like that. Sure, yeah. We're joined now by intellectual heavyweight Emma Webb and political lightweight Stephen Pound. Sorry, Stephen, couldn't resist that. Emma, what do you think about that? I mean, we need more of these initiatives, don't we, to get young people to focus on something else. It just isn't just tech, sat in their room, getting fat and unhealthy. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be a silver bullet to all of the social problems, but it can't be anything other than a good thing. I think. Firstly, in general, I think it's a good thing for young men to learn how to fight. I think that's probably that's going to be taken the wrong way, but I think that the environment of learning how to box and grappling with your peers and that kind of thing is good for young men. It gives them an outlet, particularly in areas where there might be a lot of sort of social tension and that kind of thing. So it can be nothing other than a good thing, unless, of course, they get recruited by a gang after they've learnt to box.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things that drew me into politics, actually, was campaigning on men's mental health and terrible sort of problems of suicide, particularly white working-class lads who are at the bottom of education, have been for over 20 straight years. I saw this evidence in Belfast of this work in 2 schools in the same district, one of which was affiliated to a gym, a boxing gym, where they just took the kind of the ruffians, as you would call them, in old money, and turned their lives around, and it works. It's a great thing. You must have seen this in your political time.
Very much so. And I say it doesn't just teach you how to box; it actually teaches you self-control and discipline. Yeah. And it's not just for men; it's men and women. I did a lot of sparring at the Handball Boxing Club, where Mickey Ayres actually trained. And there's a couple of things immediately struck me about that boxing club. Firstly, the largest cohort of people we had were Afghans, travellers, people who were certainly in need of some sort of discipline, control and boundaries. The second thing was, completely unsung, a huge number of the trainers and the coaches were police officers doing it in their spare time, with no fanfare, no credit whatsoever, just coming down there and sparring with the lads. And it's quite difficult running a boxing gym, keeping people going. But all I saw demonstrably, the people who actually learnt that discipline and that self-control, because, I mean, it's all right, Emma may want to sort of beat off all the crowds, the hordes of people who after her for autographs and selfies as she emerges from the tube. I know you can be quite ferocious, for a lightweight or a bantamweight, but the reality is it teaches you self-control, and I think it provides that point of stability. And you're so right. Boxing has credibility with the sort of people that the old table tennis youth club simply doesn't have.
Yeah,
couldn't agree more.
Let's talk about the Labour meltdown. There's been a huge division. It must be said, Steve. We'll start with you as a Labour man in the red corner. Palestine has brought to the fore this divided Labour Party. Keir Starmer is now facing the anger of Muslim MPs after what they are saying, misrepresenting, blatantly propagandering almost, a trip to a mosque in Wales.
Well, let's get this into some slight sense of perspective. Less than a couple of dozen councillors have resigned, and I'm not sure where that actually leaves them in terms of who they're going to vote for. People like Richard Bergen and Jeremy Corbyn, have never ever had any other position other than saying Palestine can do no wrong, Israel can do no right. I think what Keir Starmer's trying to do, and he visited this mosque in Cardiff just as much as he visited synagogues and shuls throughout the country. I think fair play to him, fair credit to him. But to call this a meltdown, I think, as dear old Tom Harris does it, Bomber Harris we used to call him, in one of the papers today, that's really over-egging the pudding.
But Emma, there are reports that the bloke, the imam, didn't even know Starmer was turning up, couldn't speak English. In fact, he didn't even know who Keir Starmer was.
Well, the mosque said that they didn't know that he was coming until the very last minute, it seems. So this was supposed to be a meeting with local representatives to talk about what's happening in Palestine. But what I think is just so... The bad PR of the wording of the tweet, I think, is partly what has upset some people, because it almost makes it look as if it was the mosque themselves who were holding hostages, or as if he had put to them the demands to release hostages. It was just a very, very poorly worded tweet. But frankly, I think from the perspective of the Labour Party, if there are some people who genuinely do have a problem with condemning the kidnapping of elderly women and children, innocent civilians, raping women, if they genuinely do have a problem with Keir Starmer standing against that, demanding the release of those hostages, many of them are children and babies, and if they have a problem with Keir Starmer, quite rightly, and this is the case under international law. They don't only have a right, but they also have an obligation to respond. I think that the Labour Party will be better without those people. I think it's pretty morally abhorrent. And I think if Keir Starmer really wanted to, have a backbone over this, he could lean into it and just simply say, if they've got a problem with it, bye-bye.
Absolutely. There are about, as you say, Stephen, about 6,000 Labour councillors, and there's about 20 of them have resigned over these comments. If you were working with those councillors in your area, what would you have said to them?
What I would say to them, quite simply, is, if you don't like the policy, change the policy, don't change the party. If you're not happy with it, have your voice heard. But once you're outside the tent, as Lyndon Johnson famously said, it's a lot better being inside and actually changing
But also,
things.
wouldn't you just say to them, what's more important to you as a councillor in Ealing? Is it more important to you that the right words are chosen by the Labour Party leader to describe a conflict thousands of miles away? Or is it more important to you that the people in your area get their bins emptied and the roads repaired and the lights working and the schools working?
Do you know, I'm going to vote for you, because that is absolutely it.
Because if I was sat in the council offices, that's what I'd be telling them.
But I think
get your priorities right.
I think that there are some people within the Labour Party who, they're not necessarily socialist. They just see the Labour Party as a vector for their own sectarian politics. So it's not really that surprising.
Well, it's Labour and the SNP. If you actually have a look at the people who signed this early day motion, there were people, even Tories in there, no Liberals, oddly enough. But look, the reality is that there is something very strange on the left about this, which is this. It's sort of it's what Lenin used to call infantile leftism, where they don't actually think it through. Calling for a ceasefire. Do you remember the horrible statement about during Rwanda? They said, if we had a ceasefire and sent in food, we'd still have dead bodies, but they'd be well-fed dead bodies.
Don't you think it's ironic ironic, Stephen, I want to press you on this, that
Press away.
so many people on the left who've accused everybody they disagree with for being fascists for the last 6 years, Brexit, for an example, are now on the side of the fascists, Hamas.
Can I just say, any argument you have with any person anywhere, the minute they start using the word fascist, they've lost the argument.
Hamas are
This might be one of the only occasions where the word fascist absolutely does apply to Hamas. If you read their charter, I mean, insofar as a modern group can be compared with fascism, it's pretty as close as you can get.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's dictatorial, it's authoritarian, and it's
anti-Semitic,
Stalinist.
genocidal.
Yeah. I know what you mean. But we've got to get off the fence on this. I mean, to imply... Nobody is saying that everything that the State of Israel has done 100% perfect. But everybody, I know, everybody with an ounce of sanity and one brain cell realises that what Hamas did is utterly and totally beyond the pale.
This is actually part of the problem of the deflation of the word fascist, and you know, all sorts of accusations of hate, because now when we're actually confronted with people who do hold these views, we've discovered that there is a whole swathe of society that finds it very difficult to condemn the murder and kidnap of Jewish babies.
Yeah, the BBC won't even call them terrorists. Moving on now to another story that's getting us hot under the collar. The migrant caravan tycoon who's made, what, 25 million quid in 1 year from housing asylum seekers in his caravan's taxpayers' money.
And hotels.
He's living it up. Look at
So
it.
he's basically, this company have, him and his company, he's called Mr. King, appropriately, I'm sure he does feel like that at the moment, have bought up hotels. So they buy up these, this is a booming business. So they'll buy up hotels in areas where they may not be full of tourists most of the time. And then, Stephen, they go and say, right, you can put 300 people in this hotel. It's going to cost you 500 quid a night per person. But look, I'm ready for you.
I have to say, that picture of him, he looked like Philip Green. Do you remember when he was on his yacht? But look, I tell you what really annoys, really gets my goat on this one. One of his first big adventures or advances was he actually took over an ex-army camp in Pembrokeshire. Now, that owned by the government. The MOD owned that camp. Why on earth didn't somebody in government say, we've got this place, we will actually use this to house asylum seekers? Why did he have to even come into it? You know, do we have nobody with an ounce of entrepreneurial spirit anywhere?
Well, yeah, we've got him.
Well, no, I was going to say, in government.
Isn't it the point, though, Amber, that people like this, he's living the life of Riley, he's working on his suntan there, you know, in the middle of Storm Baba. He's the one raking in because the government have created this opportunity for him to clean up because we have an incompetent Home Office.
And we can talk about, you know, how much money he pays to send his kids to school, £44,000 a year, and all of that. But the reality is that we have created an industry in this country, and once people start profiting from that industry, it then incentivises those who want more immigration because it's bringing them within their industry.
Well, I'm not sure there's a logic in that, because PPE was the other great scandal. I'm not entirely sure that PPE incentivised the extension of COVID, but...
I wouldn't. I totally disagree. I think it absolutely encouraged people to keep others scared.
If you have an industry that is this lucrative, of course, from some people's perspective, it's going to create incentives.
Just the money.
The thing that's wrong is that we have handled this situation so badly that we have an industry like this in the first place. This is just a man with the entrepreneurial spirit who has who's ridden the wave, as it were.
But the insanity of this is we're looking at completely the wrong end of the equation. We're looking at actually happens, you know, actually housing people. We should be looking at the first stages, actually at making an assessment and actually determine the case. At the moment, if I was running some people smuggling gang in Albania, I'd say, come across the United Kingdom, keep your head down for 3 years. The Home Office won't even talk to you for 3.5 years. And at the end of that period, you've put down roots, you've got the right to family life,
and also
and you're
bear
home
in mind,
free.
and this is about people who are escaping war zones, and what have we got now? A brand new war zone. This guy was given £1.6 billion of taxpayers' money in 1 year.
3.5 million a day.
He's got a contract until 2029.
We have to leave it there. We've been told to leave it there.
Right, we're going to be talking in the next few moments to former Minister Norman Baker on the eye-watering price tag of the Bibby Stockholm barge. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, very good morning. It's Alex Burkill here with your latest GB News weather update. Away from eastern Scotland, many places will see some drier weather for a time today, but further rain to come. In the southeast, it's a wet start first thing. If you're about to head out the door, watch out for some heavy rain on the roads, could cause some problems, but the heavy rain is clearing through as we go through the morning. Otherwise, then across much of England, Wales and Northern Ireland, there'll be some dry, bright weather into the afternoon, but a different story for eastern Scotland. Here it is going to be cloudy and wet through much of the day. Temperatures near normal for the time of year, highs around 14, possibly 15 Celsius in the south, a bit cooler further north. Later on today, we are going to see a band of rain pushing its way in from the southwest. That's gradually going to make its way northeastwards, bringing some heavy rain across parts of Northern Ireland, Wales, in the southwest, and then later into the Midlands as we go through the early hours of Thursday. Staying quite cloudy and wet across parts of Scotland. As a result, it is going to be a relatively mild night, not quite as chilly as last night, where some places did dip below freezing. As we go through Thursday, then, that rain continues to push its way northeastwards into more northern and eastern parts of England. Could be heavy at times across parts of East Anglia, and notice some hefty showers following in behind, some heavy downpours possible around south coastal parts. Also some further rain for eastern parts of Scotland. That could be a little bit heavier than the rain we're going to see through today. Temperatures similar, perhaps a touch higher than today for some.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new
It's
teeth.
your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Good morning, it's 11 a.m. on Wednesday the 25th of October. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with myself, Martin Dorby, and Bev Turner.
So all aboard. Labour claim that the Conservatives are spending more than £800 per person per night on the Bibby Stockholm barge, as the government has confirmed the use of hotels will slow down significantly in the coming months. So will they all end up on expensive barges?
And in the Middle East, there is UN tensions as the bloodshed continues. Israel demands that the United Nations chief resigns after what they call his horrible Hamas attack comments. Our security editor Mark White has all the latest in Tel Aviv.
Those comments by Antonio Guterres saying that the Palestinians had suffered 56 years of suffocating occupation have caused real anger here in Israel, with many saying the Secretary-General is no longer welcome here.
Axing the cap, the UK's financial regulators have formally scrapped the banker bonus cap, removing legislation introduced by the EU. Will this bring in post-Brexit investment?
And Shamima Begum's battle. It's the second day of a court appeal over her British citizenship removal. We'll have all the latest.
In some ways, you can't believe that the Shamima Begum story is still rumbling on.
And it's going to become something which I think is going to be totemic to the next general election.
Yeah,
it really is.
They might just kick it into the long grass maybe until after the election. It's such a complicated issue. gbviews@gbnews.com or not, maybe you think. First, though, let's have a listen to your news. Here's Ray Edison.
Good morning. It's 1 minute past 11, our top stories this hour. Israel intensified airstrikes on Gaza overnight as world leaders called for a pause in fighting for humanitarian aid. The military says it targeted Hamas infrastructure following one of the deadliest days for Palestinians. The Israeli Defense Forces say a terrorist cell was also identified. Naval patrols. Hamas terrorists exited through a tunnel shaft on the beach in Gaza and were killed when they tried to enter Israeli territory. Well, there are growing concerns that the conflict could spread across the region. Leaders of terrorist groups reportedly met to discuss a so-called resistance axis against Israel. Lebanon's Hezbollah leader is said to have held talks with Palestinian militant factions, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. The United Nations is warning the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is deepening, with more than a third of hospitals being forced to close because of damage or a lack of fuel. Doctors say patients are showing signs of disease caused by overcrowding and poor sanitation. The UN says it may have to halt its operations because fuel is actually running out. Israel blocked its delivery to prevent Hamas from seizing supplies. Well, meanwhile, the UN Secretary-General has reiterated calls for a ceasefire to allow the safe delivery of aid. Antonio Guterres says he's concerned by what he called clear violations of humanitarian law. The Palestinian Red Crescent confirmed 8 trucks crossed the Rafah border yesterday, but the UN says dozens more are still waiting to enter from Egypt.
I'm deeply concerned about the clear violations of international humanitarian law that we are witnessing in Gaza. Let me be clear, no party to an armed conflict is above international humanitarian law. It is important to also recognize the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. The Palestinian people have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation. They have seen their land steadily devoured by settlements and plagued by violence.
Speaking on GB News, Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick has criticised the Secretary-General's comments.
Well, I thought the Secretary-General's comments were wrong, they were unacceptable, and they were undiplomatic. He implied that there was a justification for what happened to Israel 2 weeks ago. There is no justification for murderous, barbaric terrorist attacks on innocent civilians, children being killed, burnt, kidnapped. You know, nobody should be trying to make a justification for that.
MPs are expected to vote later over whether Peter Bone should be suspended from the Commons. It's after a parliamentary panel found that the member for Wellingborough committed acts of bullying and one act of sexual misconduct against a male staff member back in 2012 and 2013. If the recommended 6-week suspension is approved, it could trigger a recall petition and lead to a by-election. Mr Bone denies the allegations and has vowed to continue representing his constituents. A panel is due to decide whether 5 Met police officers are guilty of gross misconduct over the stop and search of 2 black athletes. Ricardo dos Santos and his partner Bianca Williams were stopped in their car in London in 2020. Nothing was found and no arrests were made, with the pair publicly accusing the force of racism. All 5 officers have denied any wrongdoing. A watchdog says its worst nightmares have come true after thousands of AI-generated images showing child abuse were shared on a dark web forum. The Internet Watch Foundation says criminals are now using the faces and bodies of real children who have appeared in abuse imagery to create new images. In a single month, the IWF said it investigated over 11,000 shared pictures. It said the most convincing images would be difficult for even trained analysts to distinguish from real photos, and it would become harder for police to protect children. An all-British mission could be heading into orbit for the first time ever. The UK Space Agency has signed an agreement with Axiom Space, that's an American-based firm, to try to make it happen. Astronauts would spend up to 2 weeks carrying out scientific experiments and participate in educational activities. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying, play GB News. Now let's get back to Martin and Bev.
Good morning, it's 11:06. This is Britain's Newsroom. Thank you for joining me and Martin this morning. So the government has confirmed the use of hotels to accommodate migrants will slow down significantly in the coming months. Minister for Immigration, Robert Jenrick, spoke with GB News earlier.
We've worked hard over the last year to put in place simpler, more appropriate forms of accommodation, like disused military sites and barges, and it's to that kind of accommodation that the illegal migrants will now be moved, and so we can close the first 50, and I hope if we can keep making progress with stopping the boats, there will be more closures to come in the months ahead.
But the claims that housing asylum seekers on barges cost £800 per person per night, is this even a realistic alternative?
Well, Norman Baker is former Liberal Democrat minister and joins us now. I've got so many questions about this story, Norman, and I feel like Robert Jenrick didn't really answer them. Like, why are they able to close them now? We haven't seen particularly significant number of reduction in people coming over, except for perhaps weather related. And if he does kick them all out, where are they all going to go?
Well, they're very fair questions. I mean, the fact of the matter is that they have slowed down because of weather, not because of any other action from the government. Secondly, the government is right in theory, I think, to look to discontinue use of expensive hotels. That's got to be sensible for the public first, and to use alternative accommodation of a suitable standard. However, you know, what the government has done so far is announce that they intend to slow this down. I think it was 12% the figure of hotel reductions over a period of time. So nothing's actually happened yet. All there is a plan which may or may not come to fruition. So I don't think people have very much confidence that will happen. But, you know, the basic problem is twofold. One is that the Home Office is grotesquely inefficient at processing claims from people who are claiming asylum, who, by the way, aren't illegal migrants, as the Minister says. They are people claiming asylum. They become illegal if they're found not to have a case and refuse to leave the country. So the Home Office is grotesquely slow at processing these claims. So we've got far too many people here waiting to be processed, who should have been dealt with months ago, if not years ago in some cases. And secondly, we've lost the ability to return people to other European Union countries and beyond, because when we were in the European Union, Martin, as you will know, there was a Belfast Agreement which enabled us to return people to other European countries. And indeed, the EU itself had agreements with non-EU countries to return people outside those borders. Yeah, but we've lost that now.
But as you'd also be aware, Norman, if EU membership means having to take an allotted share of illegals, or asylum seekers, whatever you want to call them, entering the EU, and that number would outweigh the number entering the UK illegally if we were to be a member of the EU. I digress. £800 a night for a hotel. I don't know if we've got the picture here, but I looked earlier. This is the same price as the deluxe King Suite at the Savoy Hotel on Mayfair. It's a grotesque waste of money. On that, we can agree. Do you think this is the Tories getting into election mode now? Are they getting tough on this belatedly because they realise that if they don't, they're toast?
Well, look, I mean, Rishi Sunak has made his famous 5 pledges, and when they were made, if you recall, commentators said, well, these are straw men because they're so easy to knock down. Of course, they're going to meet the 5 targets. He will claim success. The most difficult one, perhaps, was his stop the boats mantra. Well, he hasn't stopped the boats. He hasn't stopped people coming in the country. And this is you're right, this is pre-election mode. This is an attempt to recognise they have failed on this major attempt, and they're trying to spin it now to say they're doing something about it.
I mean, we don't hear an awful lot about the Liberal Democrats anymore, Norman, apart from, obviously, your good self. But how are the Liberal Democrats going to handle this? And similarly, the same question for Labour. How do you handle this issue when you are meant to be ideologically welcoming to people who are escaping persecution, etc., and yet it is so unpopular with the British public and comes out number 1 on polls repeatedly as the issue that affects most people?
Well, I mean, people don't want people to come here without good reason. However, this country has a long tradition of being accepting of people who are coming from areas where they're under threat of death and persecution.
I think our patience is running a bit thin on that now.
But I mean, for example, the British people have been very good about people coming from Ukraine. They've been very welcoming on those, and also Hong Kong before. So I think it depends how it's actually presented. But look, I mean, I'm not here to speak to the Lib Dems. I'm no longer an active member of the Lib Dems, but I imagine what needs to be done is to, first of all, speed up the process whereby people are assessed, so that people who have no cause to be here can be deported very quickly.
But isn't that the point? This is becoming a wedge issue because people like yourself would say we need to clear the backlog. Well, that's what's happening. The backlog is being cleared.
Well, and really, is it?
And at that point, those asylum seekers are eligible to work or claim benefits. So should they, still remain in a free hotel, even though they have the rights, effectively, of a de facto British citizen?
No, they shouldn't. This is not a Lib Dem position, I don't think, but I've always taken the view that people who come here should be required to work, and they should pay their way, and we shouldn't be supporting people in the state. And I think it's quite wrong that people are left, sometimes in destitution for months, if not years, unable to work legally, with the state paying for them, sometimes in expensive hotels. If they were actually given some work to do, and many people who come here to claim asylum are doctors, are engineers, are skilled people we could actually use.
The vast majority, Norman, it has to be said, are not that.
Well, it depends where they come from. If you look at people who come from countries where there are severe human rights issues, such as the Middle East, often they do have those skills. People who come from Eastern Europe, by and large, Albanian places, we've now got an agreement with Albania, don't have those skills. So we have to be able to separate those who are genuine claimants for refugees, and most people who come here, by the way, have their claims upheld, and those who are here for no good reason. And we have to separate those and deal with those. And I think the British people would be more tolerant of the people who have genuine concerns if the people who don't were disposed of outside the country.
What about those who arrive in Britain with no documentation, which sometimes can be as many as 75% arriving here illegally, who claim that they're surgeons, who claim that they're rocket scientists? What do we do then?
Well, it's difficult because if people, sometimes they're frauds, of course, but sometimes they're genuine. They've had to flee the country without documentation by nefarious routes to get out of the country to save their lives. So they don't always arrive with documentation, and it's difficult to assess that. But, you know, we have to be, on the one hand, rigorous to assess these people, assess them quickly, and, as I say, return those who have no reason to be here, and integrate those who do have a reason to be here.
But the returns rate is so desperately, desperately low.
Yes, I know.
It's a tiny, tiny percentile of those who arrive. Surely you could agree the best solution, and this is why the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party, by the way, are silent on it, is to stop the boats arriving in the first place.
Well, look, I mean, the boats are a symptom of an earlier problem. They're an earlier problem that we haven't got agreement with European Union countries to stop them crossing the Channel. That's point one. And an earlier problem that we, the West, have, in many cases, caused the problems.
500 billion quid has gone to France, and it hasn't done much to stop the flow.
Well, I know it hasn't, and that's a failure of negotiation on this side to reach a proper agreement with the French. It really is. But, you know, if we had a better relationship with the European Union, then maybe they'd be more willing to cooperate with us.
Well, look, I mean, one of the reasons we've got all of this migration now and people looking for refuge is because of the number of wars. Let's go back to Israel at the moment. There's some footage which has just arrived arrived here. We understand that it is footage of Hamas fighters being blown out of the water by the Israeli Defence Force. It's a little difficult to make out. It looks like it was perhaps an invasion via the sea onto the beach, and it looks like snipers taking out individuals.
Yeah, so I think this is footage of that original invasion on October the 7th. This is, if you remember, the paragliders by air. There was a land invasion when the border was breached, the Iron Wall, and also added to that there was a sea invasion from Palestine, from the Gaza Strip into Israel, and this is a part of them releasing footage of older footage to show. This is from last night, beg your pardon. This is from last night. This is them arriving last night. So, Norman, clearly the invasion of Israel by Hamas is still ongoing.
I think it is, and there are serious questions about the Israeli military, to be honest with you, as to how this is allowed to happen in the first place. You would think they would have been aware of what was happening, and they weren't. Obviously, what happened in Israel was grotesque and horrific, and there could be no justification whatsoever for the murder of innocent civilians. But equally, people are now saying, is it right that Israel is bombing, apparently, indiscriminately in Gaza? Over 1,000 children, I believe, have died in the Gaza Strip since Israel started its action. You know, I know where you can defend Hamas. They're an appalling organisation. But you're difficult to defend Israel, the Israeli government, the way they're responding, to be honest with you. And they're not doing themselves any favours. They need to get world opinion on their side. And President Biden said, look, 9/11 was a horrific act for America, but we overreacted and got it wrong. And he said that to the Israelis as a friend. And the Israelis need to listen to President Biden on that.
Thank you, Norman.
We have to interrupt you there. We have some breaking news now, and that is a paedophile former police officer who's been sentenced to life at Cardiff Crown Court.
Lewis Edwards pled guilty to more than 100 child sex offences. He incited young girls aged between 10 and 16 to send him degrading pictures and videos over Snapchat whilst he was a serving police officer.
And he refused to attend court to hear his own sentencing. Let's get the latest now from Mark White in Tel Aviv.
Good morning, Mark. Are you there? Hello, Mark. We've actually just seen some footage which we've seen for the first time. I don't know whether you've even had eyes on this footage yet. It appears to be from last night. Hamas terrorists approaching the coast of Israel and being taken out by the IDF. Can you confirm or just elucidate what it is, Mark?
Yes, I can confirm this was an incident that unfolded north of Gaza yesterday when Israeli Defence Forces, jet fighters and also naval vessels attacked a number of Hamas terrorists who had left a tunnel system just in northern Gaza and were trying to gain access via the sea to Yakim, which is a settlement just north of Gaza with a view, the Israelis say, to carrying out a terrorist attack there. So they responded with their naval vessels and with aerial strikes and killed those individuals involved in that. But it was clearly a very worrying development and an indication that Hamas still has significant capabilities, because this came on the back of the largest barrage of rockets into central Israel from Gaza yesterday. We were just at that hospital where the two released hostages were being treated yesterday when the sirens went off. Dozens of rockets coming in towards central Tel Aviv that were intercepted by the Iron Dome missile system. We heard the explosions of the missiles being intercepted and the supersonic booms of the Iron Dome missiles as they passed the speed of sound, heading for those rockets. One rocket did get through and badly damaged a community just in the northeast of Tel Aviv, but an indication that attempted incursion into northern Israel, those very significant rocket barrages, tell you that despite this intensification of the aerial war, the strikes against Hamas targets in Gaza, that they still have some very significant capabilities. And that, of course, adds the other question. brings in the other dimension here. If they are not degrading Hamas to the extent that they wanted to from the air, then that makes a ground invasion, it seems, inevitable. Yesterday, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that ground war was imminent. We know there's a lot of pressure, though, from governments around the world to try to hold off to allow the hostage negotiations to continue. But Israel certainly does want to progress with the second stage of this war against Hamas as soon as possible.
Mark, do we take it as good news that any sort of ground invasion by Israel hasn't yet happened in Gaza? Does that suggest that there is diplomacy happening behind the scenes? And, of course, we had the release of the 2 hostages yesterday.
I think there's no doubt that the hostage situation is a major factor in why this ground incursion has not happened as yet. You've got Hamas just dribbling out hostages a couple at a time every few days. If they continue to do that over a period of time, we're talking months. Now, I don't think Israel will sit back and allow that to be the case, but clearly it's very alive to the requests from the United States and other governments just to try to allow as much time as possible for any hostage negotiations. Interestingly, the Qatari Prime Minister has said today that they're in the advanced stages of negotiations to release more hostages. Yesterday, officials and sources were saying to me that this was straight out of the Hamas playbook, though. They are just playing for time. And the longer, of course, they have, the more time they have to really enforce their positions, to lay traps for the Israelis when those forces eventually go into Gaza proper.
OK, Mark, thank you so much for doing such a brilliant job out there. We've got loads of your emails coming in, and we're going to get to those in just a moment. And thank you also to Norman Baker for contributing this morning. Now, still to come, the cap on bonuses for bankers is set to be scrapped. I mean, it's a good day if you're a banker, I suppose, on a massive bonus.
It's a good day for Brexit, because we weren't allowed to do this under an EU directive brought in 2008.
Well, there you go. Don't go anywhere. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Welcome back. It's 11:25. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with myself, Martin Daubney and Bev Turner.
It's a very good news day if you are a banker. Not sure what it means for the rest of us, though, because the UK is going to scrap the need for a cap on bankers' bonuses. Have I got that right, Martin Daubney?
You have. Initially, it was a 100% cap on their salary, and that was an EU directive. So, is this a post-Brexit success story?
The man who will know is Liam Halligan, who is here. Right, Liam, explain this to us. What
no banker bonus for me.
What did we have before and why has it changed?
So you remember the 2008 financial crisis when the world went to hell in a handcart and bankers, investment analysts taking massive risks, crashed the global economy. Banking sector had to be bailed out by taxpayers. We're frankly still paying for that.
Yeah.
The world economy has never really got back into gear since 2008, if we're honest. And in 2008, the EU launched a directive to try and rein in bankers' bonuses. It eventually came in 2014, and of course that applied to the UK. And bonuses, not just for bankers, but in the whole of the financial services industry, were limited to 100% of salary, so people weren't incentivised to take massive risks. Now that we're outside of the EU, we don't have to comply with that. So you remember the Liz Truss Kwasi Kwarteng mini-budget last autumn. Most of what they announced in that budget was scrapped. They announced some things I thought were pretty good. They announced that they didn't want to put up corporation tax. It's since gone up from 19 to 25%. They announced they wanted to do reforms of some really nasty tax rules called IR35, which make it very difficult if you're a self-employed person, like a lot of journalists are, but also, you know, tradespeople, plumbers and all the rest of it. One of the things they also included, Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, was that they wanted to scrap the EU cap on bankers' bonuses as a kind of post-Brexit move. Now, that is going to happen at the end of this month. What do I think of it? I have to say, I think the timing of this is politically really tin-eared. I think it looks really bad. You know, a lot of these people in financial services, they make, you know, hundreds of thousands of pounds a year, or they get...
Millions,
hundreds of thousands of pounds a year. And, of course, many of them get a lot more. I think when they talk about Brexit bonuses, we should be doing things like, you know, making it easier for small business people to get through red tape. There should be more incentives in you know, many aspects of industry where I think the EU has been too cautious with its precautionary principle. And Kemi Badenoch, actually, the business secretary, she's been highlighting today, and I think this is a good idea, the fact that over the last couple of years, post-Brexit Britain has actually attracted more venture capital, more inward investment than any other EU country, quotes, despite Brexit.
Now, those in favour of this would argue, in a global scrabble for talent, it will allow us now to get the best bankers from Frankfurt, from Paris, from Singapore, from Hong Kong, and therefore boost the chances of the city, which raises more tax, which means more money for the exchequer. So there is a fiscal argument to say this is a good thing for the economy.
There is indeed, and of course we have to represent the other side, and the other side is exactly as you say, Martin. Financial services is our biggest export. You know, Britain arguably has the financial centre of the world under many headings in London. But do you really want people who are massively juiced up, frankly, to take enormous risks with, you know, banking deposits, with the savings and investments of ordinary people? And, you know, I've worked in financial services. I used to be a partner in an asset management company. You know, I'm a pro-market person. Unlike almost any other journalist in this business, I actually have genuine hands-on business experience managing hundreds of millions of dollars and pounds in financial markets. And I would say this: financial markets are really fragile at the moment. We've just had the head of HSBC, one of the world's top 10 biggest banks, saying that he thinks, Noel Quinn, there is a reckoning coming because the governments have taken on so much debt, industries have taken on so much debt. Do we really want supercharged risk takers now, fueled by massive bonuses that make them feel that immortal, as if they can never do anything wrong? Or do we want steady as she goes people? And as for this argument that the city creates all kind of money and wealth for the UK, yeah, there's lots of good jobs, you know, middle management jobs, you know, support services jobs. Of course, there are lots of good jobs. But is a massive financial services industry really what we want if, at least once a generation, it crashes the entire economy?
And it just also makes, you know what it makes me worried
That's coming
about?
from me.
But it makes me worried that if there is some massive reckoning coming round the corner, some sort of reset of our financial system, I'm not sure I want the people who are in the positions of power right now to be creaming off as much as they possibly can before the house of cards come tumbling down.
I agree. And look, I'm a well-known financial journalist. I have to be careful. I'm not saying the house of cards is going to come tumbling down. What I am saying is that if you look at the valuations of a lot of the world's leading stock markets at the moment, they're very overvalued, you know, what we call price-earnings ratios. What I am saying is that you've now got really serious people who run massive banks warning that there's too much froth in the market, too much excess, not least because there's so much geopolitical risk around.
We've got to move on, but the next story makes me think of you. Liz Truss, she's your mate. Would she be any good in the jungle?
I don't know if she's my mate. She's a leading Conservative. It's my job to follow the movers and shakers.
Her a little.
I really don't.
Yeah, well, if she listens to you, let me.
Well, a lot of people listen to me, Bev. I don't advise anyone. No, seriously. I'm an Ofcom regulated journalist. A lot of people want my advice, and a lot of people seek my advice, but I don't advise anyone. Certainly not for money.
All right. Well, let me rephrase that then. Would she look good in a bikini and I'm a celebrity? Get me out of here.
I'm not going to answer that.
Liam Halligan is never speechless. I'm so glad I did that.
There's just no good way to answer that, is there?
Right, listen, I'm an MP. Get me out of here. This is what we're discussing. Liz Truss might be heading for the jungle in the next series of I'm a Celebrity. Get me out of here. Would she look good in a bikini? I can't believe I'm asking that of a former Prime Minister.
I think that might get a lot of elderly Daily Telegraph readers quite excited.
A little hot under the collar.
Yeah. And unstoppable shift. The International Energy Agency says the number of electric cars will jump almost tenfold by the end of the decade. All the days numbered for the humble diesel and petrol car.
All of that and much more after your morning's news with Ray Addison.
Good morning, it's 11:32, our top stories. A former South Wales police officer has been jailed for life with a minimum of 12 years for sexual offences against children. Lewis Edwards used fake social media accounts and posed as a teenager to groom more than 200 young girls online. He forced his victims to take indecent videos and images of themselves, which he secretly recorded and used them as blackmail. The judge says he used different tactics to deceive the children.
The defendant had a pattern of behaviour. He made online contact with the girl, sometimes pretending to be someone that she knew, sometimes making contact through friends of friends. The defendant pretended to be a boy of similar age. He groomed his victims, psychologically manipulating them until he had gained control over them. He would often be friendly and complimentary, pretending an interest in his victims and their lives, gaining their trust and building relationships with them.
Israel intensified airstrikes on Gaza overnight as world leaders called for a pause in fighting for humanitarian aid. The military says it targeted Hamas infrastructure, including a weapons warehouse. The Israeli Defense Forces also says the Navy spotted terrorists exiting a tunnel onto a beach on the Strip. They were killed when they tried to enter Israeli territory by sea. Well, there are growing concerns that the conflict could spread across the region. Leaders of terrorist groups reportedly met to discuss a so-called resistance axis against Israel and how they could achieve victory in Gaza. Lebanon's Hezbollah leader is said to have held talks with Palestinian militant factions, Hamas and Islamic Jihad. MPs are expected to vote later on whether Peter Bone should be suspended from the Commons. It's after a parliamentary panel found that the member for Wellingborough committed acts of bullying and one act of sexual misconduct against a male staff member back in 2012 and 2013. If the recommended 6-week suspension is approved, it could trigger a recall petition and then lead to a by-election. He denies the allegations. You can find more on all of those stories on our website, gbnews.com.
For exclusive, limited edition and rare gold coins that are always newsworthy, Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Let's take a look at the markets. The pound will buy you $1.2121 and €1.1468. Price of gold currently standing at £1,626 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,389 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
So still to come this morning, it's day 2 of 3 of the court appeal over Shamima Begum's citizenship removal. Is she Britain's problem?
Well, it's a big talking point. We'll have that after the break. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's
my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Very good morning. It's 11:39 with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Bev Turner, and Martin Daubney this morning. Let's see what you've all been saying at home.
Yeah, people have been getting very hot on the collar about flooding and who's to blame. And we had a report from Rotherham earlier on, and Michael says this: why don't we just dredge the rivers? We're out of the EU, so no one's stopping us. Dredging the rivers would deepen them and get rid of all the rubbish dumped in them. It's common sense. And Michael, that's why it will never catch on.
Well, absolutely. And Leslie says, I think your guest Rose hit the nail on the head. That was Rose, who was in Rotherham. It was her house, Rose Kent, who was damaged. She said, we're constantly building new homes, including on floodplains, which means the water has nowhere to go. It's not rocket science. Let's just stop building so many new houses. Most of them are ugly anyway. We do need houses, though.
Yeah, Annette also is similarly unforgiving. She said, I'm sorry to hear that people have been affected by Storm Babbitt, but I don't think the government should have to bail them out. I hate to say it, but it's their fault for living there.
That's a bit harsh.
It's very harsh.
Well, Sheila has said, Bev is right. I always love an email that starts like that. I can't lie.
You send them in yourself?
No, my mum doesn't know. Councils don't clean the drains anymore. Climate change isn't to blame for the flooding. It's lazy local government.
Bail them out is the appropriate expression, isn't it?
Isn't it? It's very good, that, yeah.
You may have heard that Stephen Pound has joined us. Miles also says you can't build on floodplains and then complain when we get flooded out. Somebody needs to sort this government out.
Well, absolutely. Do you know what bothers me as well? Is the trouble is we sit here and talk about, you know, poor government or poor local councils, and it all seems quite sort of untangible, doesn't it? You know, bad government doesn't always lead to people having terrible existence. And then you see someone's front room flooded and all their stuff washed away. Like, this is the implications of poor decision-making when it affects people like that.
No, it's the wrong sort of rain.
We heard Therese Coffey say earlier.
We've heard that, you know. And, you know, I'm sorry, we've got it. The rain from the west is all sorted, but this devious, sneaky, two-faced, crafty anticipation has emerged from the east. It's the beast from the east. You know, the rain, has it got no respect whatsoever?
It's awful, isn't it?
OK, well, that's the beast from the left-hand side of the studio there, Stephen Pound. More of him in a minute. But before that, Stephen, it's the second day of a 3-day appeal over British citizenship of Shamima Begum. Last night, Conservative MP and fellow GB News presenter Jacob Rees-Mogg explained what he feels the outcome should be.
She was a British citizen, and it seems to me that if she committed criminal acts, the place for her to be tried for them is here. She is our responsibility as a nation.
Controversial, some of you might say. I think I am with him, though, Emma. I mean, if we're going to stick to the rule of law, and she was a British citizen, she broke the law, I want her to be tried. Go.
I don't often disagree with Jacob Rees-Mogg, but I do on this. I think that it was right for the Home Secretary to strip her of her citizenship in the first place. It's within the powers of the Home Secretary to do that for reasons of national security. The public cannot be made aware of all of the intelligence that was involved in making that decision. If you cannot strip someone of their citizenship for joining a terrorist organisation, what on earth does that power exist for? I don't buy the fact that she, you know, because she was 15 years old, that means that she was too young to make a responsible judgment about what she chose to go and do. This wasn't a gap year. She chose to join a terrorist organisation. She knew exactly what she was doing. At the time, there were videos of the beheadings of journalists, of aid workers, all over the internet. Of course, she knew what she was going to join. I just simply don't buy it. And actually, just to quote quickly from one of the lawyers in this case, says that Begum contends that national security should not be a trump card. Well, I'm sorry, but I think that it should. She has dual citizenship. It was legal to strip her of her citizenship. This this is all part of the legal process to decide whether or not that was a legal decision. And in the previous Special Immigrations Appeal Committee, she lost the case. This has gone to the Court of Appeal. It's obviously going to drag out through the courts because that's the proper process. But I think it was absolutely right to strip her of her citizenship. I don't think that she should come back and be tried here.
I think she should come back and face the music, really and truly. I think the idea that she's now having as a defence that she was involved in human trafficking, that is risible, that is disgusting, because in many ways she was the trafficker.
Yes.
She took the other two people with her. But do you remember the Mary Bell case, who was a young woman who killed another child? And she was revived, which says string her up, and she was capable of redemption. You can, I mean, obviously the James Bulger case, two young boys, one of them turned out to be a wrong 'un. But I honestly think there is a possibility of redemption here. And I think the fact that she's there, what's going to happen? Is she going to spend the rest of her life there? She's had 2 miscarriages, she's lost 2 children, both the women she went with have been dead. You know, I honestly think that if we stand for anything in this country, it's actually giving people a fair break.
Decisions have consequences, I'm sorry, but the fact that she's being painted...
It's not going to encourage anybody else, any other 15-year-old girl.
Well, I mean, if she comes back here, she'll be a celebrity. She might even end up on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here with Liz Truss. You never know. But I think the fact is that she is painting herself and being painted as the victim here, when the reality is that she went to join a genocidal terrorist organisation that sex trafficked jihadis. It's way above the age of criminal responsibility. If she was a boy at the age of 15 who had gone out to join ISIS and had been an ISIS fighter, we would not be having this conversation. Nobody would have a problem with it because they didn't have a problem. One of the arguments that's often made is that it was racist to strip her of her citizenship. Well, we stripped Jack Letts of his citizenship and he was a dual Canadian citizen. So it has absolutely nothing to do with race and everything to do with national security.
But he was about 23 when his parents were funding him, as I recall at the time. Yeah, I think it's a slightly different case.
Yeah, I very much doubt that if he was a boy that had gone out to join ISIS and had been a jihadi fighter, that we would be having the same conversation and painting him as a victim in the same way.
I don't know. I mean, I think at the moment she's actually getting away with it by not being brought back to face the music.
But then it's fascinating politically, Stephen, that Jacob Rees-Mogg said that. Do you think that's an indication that he fears the government may lose this case? Well, or is it a case of him being pragmatic or abiding by the law? Because it's interesting, because Sir Keir Starmer believes Shamima Begum should return to Britain. Well, and this could be a huge wedge issue with lots of voters who believe if Begum is allowed to return to Britain, the Conservative Party has finally thrown in the towel. It cannot control its borders whatsoever.
I hate to say this. I had a long conversation with Jacob Rees-Mogg yesterday on the principle of civis romana sum and the case of Don Pacifico, and he was quoting all number of 18th and 19th century cases where anybody who is a British citizen, has these inalienable rights that will never be taken away from them. I think it's a shame that Bangladesh didn't take her back, which was actually, her original country. But the fact remains is that, she, at the moment, is not facing the music. She's not been going on trial. She doesn't have a chance to rebuild her life in a refugee camp in I think she's in Amman, I'm not sure where. Amman, sorry. So I think that if we, in this country, we have some responsibility for her. She was brought up in this country, and I think we should actually bring her back, face the music. Let's have it out in the open air, and hopefully discourage other people. Let's not make a martyr out of her. That's what the jihadis love.
How would it discourage other people if you're allowed to join ISIS, a death cult that wants the extermination of the entire Western world, and then allow them to come back to Britain, no doubt, to live off the taxpayers' expense for the rest of their natural life?
I think people should know that if they go and join a terrorist organisation and they're a dual citizenship, then it's highly likely they'll have their citizenship revoked and they just simply won't be allowed back here. And that the consequences of their actions may be that they have to live in a refugee camp / foreign prison for the rest of their days, whether that might be a decade or whether that might be 5, 6 decades. I just pure and simple, I don't think that somebody who has done what Shamima Begum has done, and that may put, if she comes back here to this country, she is going to probably require security, probably at taxpayer expense. She'd probably be put up in a house at taxpayers' expense, because if she presumably she's not going to find it very easy to get a job very easily unless she makes money out of being a celebrity here. And we also are not fully appraised of the same facts that the Home Secretary took into consideration when making that decision. So, frankly, I think that I think that people need to accept that actions have consequences. And if you go and join a terrorist organisation that fights against this country and that commits acts of terror against not only civilians in this country, but we have to remember children with the Manchester Arena bombing, which was something that she seemed to excuse in one of her earlier interviews and showed absolutely no compunction whatsoever. I think that we have to send the message. Actions have consequences. She gave up her citizenship, as far as I'm concerned, not in the legal sense, but in a deeper sense. The moment that she decided to join a terrorist organisation and state-building project that fought against this country.
Yeah. I find it fascinating, and I watched the documentary where they interviewed her, and I didn't find her a particularly reliable witness. But I also know what 15-year-old girls are like, and I know that 15-year-old girls think they know everything, and 15-year-old girls know nothing. So you are vulnerable at 15 to
a lot of people now, I think,
influences.
have large levels of suspicion that she's saying things without moving her lips. For example, the comment that she said there sounds like she's been briefed by a lawyer, perhaps, and it just begs the whole question.
You saw the little makeover that she had, where she had the Union Jack behind her and dressed up like Kim Kardashian.
And people would say anything to get back into the country if the alternative is a death camp abroad. I mean...
And I understand why it makes people's blood boil, I really do. I do find her psychologically fascinating, though, and in some ways I want to interview her. I want her to come back, because I thought the guy that did the programme with her didn't ask the probing questions, or it was edited in a way that meant she got off the hook. I think the serious questions over the babies that died. I think she had 3 babies that died.
I'd like to say in this country we're actually better than the sort of people that she went to fight. I think we're better than the jihadis and the Islamic terrorists. I think we're better than that. I think we actually believe in such a thing as redemption, and I think also responsibility.
I think that we also have a moral duty to the citizens of this country not to be mugs. I do believe in redemption, and I think that she can be redeemed in a camp elsewhere, but I think that the government has a moral duty...
That's a brilliant political answer.
I think that the government have a moral duty to the people of this country not to be a doormat.
All right, thank you both. Brilliant discussion.
Excellent stuff.
Right, still to come, we're going to build up to the start of PMQs at midday with Stephen and Emma. Who better? This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Hello, very good morning. It's Alex Burkill here with your latest GB News weather update. Away from eastern Scotland, many places will see some drier weather for a time today, but further rain to come. In the southeast, it's a wet start first thing. If you're about to head out the door, watch out for some heavy rain on the roads, could cause some problems, but the heavy rain is clearing through as we go through the morning. Otherwise, then across much of England, Wales and Northern Ireland, there'll be some dry, bright weather into the afternoon, but a different story for eastern Scotland. Here it is going to be cloudy and wet through much of the day. Temperatures near normal for the time of year, highs around 14, possibly 15 Celsius in the south, a bit cooler further north. Later on today, we are going to see a band of rain pushing its way in from the southwest. That's gradually going to make its way northeastwards, bringing some heavy rain across parts of Northern Ireland, Wales, in the southwest, and then later into the Midlands as we go through the early hours of Thursday. Staying quite cloudy and wet across parts of Scotland. As a result, it is going to be a relatively mild night, not quite as chilly as last night, where some places did dip below freezing. As we go through Thursday, then, that rain continues to push its way northeastwards into more northern and eastern parts of England. Could be heavy at times across parts of East Anglia, and notice some hefty showers following in behind, some heavy downpours possible around south coastal parts. Also some further rain for eastern parts of Scotland. That could be a little bit heavier than the rain we're going to see through today. Temperatures similar, perhaps a touch higher than today for some.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Right, we are about 4 minutes away from PMQs. We're going to be taking that live.
Yeah, and afterwards, Mark Longhurst and Pip Thompson will sit down with Labour MP Steve McCabe and Conservative MP Bob Seeley for some in-depth analysis on PMQs.
Right, let's talk to Emma and Stephen now about what might come up at PMQs today. Immigration, very high up on the agenda, Stephen. Now, Robert Jenrick's been going around today to say they're going to close 100 hotels looking after, or housing migrants, looking after extremely well in some situations. This is something that Conservatives have got to get right before the next election.
Well, yes, I mean, at the moment they're making a big song and dance about moving sort of a couple of dozen people in there, and it's going to be difficult for Sunak. I mean, Sunaked they call him nowadays because he's looking quite exhausted from all this. But there's two personal things which one is yesterday morning the memorial shield for David Amis, who was murdered, as we know, was revealed on the wall and quite close to the one where Joe Cox is. In fact, as you come into the House of Commons chamber, all round you are the shields of MPs who were killed in the war, and also people like Erin Eve who were killed while serving MPs. And sometimes you forget that MPs actually have quite a dangerous job.
Yeah.
So the other thing, of course, is the Peter Bone thing. Peter Bone had a reputation in Qs for years and years ago. Said, as Mrs. Bone said to me at breakfast this morning. Well, now we know that what Mrs. Bone said to me at breakfast was on your bike, Peter. But so there will be some mention of that and the possibility of another by-election. But you're absolutely right. It will be. Obviously, Israel-Palestine, the Hamas situation this morning with the attack at the sea, but it will also be about immigration. It'll be about... I think they'll try to get something in it about inflation with us. It's not quite as bad as it was.
Sorry, I was going to say, and maybe bankers' bonuses, Emma, in terms of the fact that the bankers' bonus cap has now been dropped so bankers can make a fortune. There is some political capital to be made out of that from Labour today.
Yeah, I mean, it's not difficult to imagine how Labour are going to respond to this. But you know, it's one of those subjects that just lends itself very well to political posturing, doesn't it?
And it'd be good if we could see some policy from Labour on how they would attempt to deal with the illegal immigration crisis. But today's news, of course, Labour Party data has shown it's £800 a night for a berth on the Bibby Stockholm. Do you think we're going to expect Labour to put the boot into the Tories on that?
You know, I do wonder whether Starmer facing the backlash, however small or large it may be in reality, the fact that it's in the press and being described as a meltdown is surely enough smoke and mirrors for it to be considered in PR terms. I wonder whether Starmer will moderate himself somewhat on the migration issue in order to appease certain voting demographics who are annoyed with him over his stance on Israel and Hamas, or whether he'll lean into it and actually be quite, well, at least I don't think that they would be robust in reality, but I think maybe he might talk tough in order to lean into it. So it'd be interesting to see which way he chooses to go.
The Tories will certainly be going on the 20 or so Labour councillors who've resigned. They'll certainly be pressing on that. And I should imagine they'll also be having a go at the SNP as well, you know, who were sort of co-signatories of this 36-name early day motion that was being submitted. So there's going to be a lot of this sort of personality stuff. But, I mean, one of the problems is you never know what's going to be asked. I mean, Gerald Kaufman said to me when I first got elected, there's only one question that you can ask Tony Blair at Prime Minister's Questions. And I said, what's that? He said, would the Prime Minister care to remind us of his latest triumphs? And I actually did ask him that once.
But that is because Tony Blair was very, very good at self-marketing and promotion of himself. Rishi Sunak doesn't have that same skill. Neither does Starmer.
Keir Starmer even less so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, there was that lovely time when we were having a big debate about the European Union, and Tony Blair said, listen, Norway's not in the European Union. Well, nobody had said it was, but because there was such a hubbub, everybody thought somebody on the Tory bench had said Norway's in the EU.
Well, that's because he was an actor, Tony Blair.
No,
fundamentally, first and foremost.
Very quick. His brain was almost as quick as Emma's. I mean, he's very, very sharp.
But it's interesting because Starmer is positioning himself as, you know, Blair to...
Well, Blair was the heir to Thatcher, wasn't he? The people used to say he was the heir to Maggie.
but I wonder if the Labour Party, all they're doing now is attacking the Tories on illegal immigration, but they're not having any ideas of their own. But do they need to do that? I mean, what's the way that the Tories can try and turn this around at the moment, Emma? It seems like the Tories are heading over the edge of a cliff.
I don't know if they can turn it back, if I'm honest. They'd have to really get their act together very, very fast in order to turn the ship enough to miss the iceberg that's coming. I think that Keir Starmer could do one of two things. I mean, either he can talk tough, but I don't think that they've actually got any real tangible policies that would convince, you know, the voters.
Energy security and the idea, the tribute... This,
on migration, I was going to say.
I know, but you're talking about policies. I keep thinking it's sort of GBNews. In fact, it's GB Energy, this company that we're talking about setting up. Because the cost of living... You remember, you know, the famous, you know, James Carver, it's the economy, stupid. Immigration is not the #1 item on most people's agenda. It is the cost of living, the fact that we can't afford to you know, heat and eat. That is the big issue, and that's where Labour is making the case.
My point was going to be that I think, given the bad PR handling of this mosque stunt that he pulled, it seems that from Starmer's perspective, the best thing he can do in order to win votes at the next general election is to just keep his head down while the Tories keep mucking things up or fail to turn the ship, as I said. Because every time he does try to wade in, he seems to do it in a way that is somewhat candid, and it tends to backfire.
That's a counsel of despair, that is, isn't it, really?
Yes.
Whose side are you on?
OK, let's go live. Here is the Prime Minister.
The friends and families of those who lost their lives. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I join the Prime Minister in expressing my sympathies to all those affected by the recent storms. But, Mr. Speaker, 2 million people just cannot be sustained from 20-odd aid lorries. Utter catastrophe is being unleashed in Gaza. Doesn't the Prime Minister now see that only a humanitarian ceasefire can bring about the scale of emergency aid that is needed? Of course, Israel has a right to defend itself in line with international and humanitarian laws.